Drogheda, a town once known more for its history and coastal charm, became the unlikely epicenter of one of Ireland's most violent and protracted gangland feuds in recent memory. Central to this dark chapter are two brothers, Keith and Josh Boylan, whose rise from local thugs to crime lords reshaped the underworld landscape and sent shockwaves through the community. Their story is not just one of crime and violence, but a deeply entrenched saga of power struggles, loyalty, betrayal, and the devastating cost of gang warfare on a small town. For many years, the Boylan brothers operated behind a veil of secrecy. While rumors and whispers of their involvement in criminal underbelly circulated, few outside law enforcement and the inner circles of organized crime knew their true identities or extent of control. This changed dramatically in a courtroom on the 19th of June 2025, where Garda John Walsh exposed the faces behind the notorious Boylan organized crime group. Keith Boylan, at 30 years old, had already earned a reputation as the ruthless leader of the gang. His younger brother Josh, only 26, was his second in command, a position of immense influence and responsibility within the organization. The brothers had not simply emerged overnight. Their criminal careers began in their teens, initially under the shadow of the powerful Owen Maguire, a formidable mob boss who once held sway over the local drug trade. However, the brothers' ambitions soon eclipsed their loyalties. A bitter split with Maguire ignited a feud that would consume the town for years. The fracture was not just a personal clash, but a fundamental struggle for control of the lucrative drug market, but a battle that would pit families and factions against each other in a violent war. The feud's roots date back to 2017, when internal disputes and power plays fractured a previously unified criminal enterprise. The Boylan brothers emerged as leaders of what became known as the anti-Maguire faction, opposing the Price-Maguire organized crime group headed by Owen Maguire. This split was more than a gang rivalry. It was a battle for the very soul of Drogheda's underworld. The conflict escalated swiftly and brutally. In July 2018, the violent nature of the feud became starkly clear when Robbie Lawler, an associate of the Boylans and a man who would later be labeled a serial killer, shot Owen Maguire multiple times, leaving the mob boss paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. This violent act sent shockwaves through Drogheda. It signaled that the feud had entered a new and dangerous phase, one where retribution and terror would be the norm rather than the exception. From 2017 to 2020, the streets were transformed into a battleground. Shootings, kidnappings, assaults, petrol bombings, and murders became disturbingly common occurrences. 4 people lost their lives in this brutal war, including a teenager whose horrific murder would come to symbolize the darkest aspects of the conflict. Keen Mulready Woods, aged just 17, was abducted, murdered, and dismembered in an act so chilling that it shocked the entire nation. His body parts were discovered scattered across Dublin, a gruesome message of the ruthless nature of the gangs involved. The Boylan organized crime group and their associates were widely believed to be responsible, cementing their reputation for brutality and their willingness to use extreme violence to maintain power. The community lived in fear. Everyday life was overshadowed by the threat of violence, and the social fabric of the town was fraying under the strain. Garda Commissioner Drew Harris responded by deploying the Emergency Response Unit in 2019, acknowledging the severity of the situation and the need for urgent intervention. Despite their rise to power and fearsome reputation, Keith and Josh were far from untouchable. The gangland world they inhabited was unforgiving, and assassination attempts were part of the perilous existence they led. Keith Boylan, the gang's figurehead, survived 2 assassination attempts in 2019 during the feud's most violent period. The first attack took place near Donamead Shopping Centre in Dublin in May, when multiple shots were fired at him. Remarkably, Keith escaped unharmed. The second attack, however, was far more serious. In June 2019, while sitting in his car in the Termon Abbey area, Keith was targeted again. Gunmen opened fire, striking him twice, once in the chin and once in the shoulder. Several other bullets lodged in the vehicle. He was rushed to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital, where doctors treated his wounds. Though seriously injured, Keith survived, underscoring the lethal stakes of the gangland turf war. Josh, meanwhile, operated more quietly, but no less effectively, building networks abroad to facilitate the gang's drug supply routes. Based in Thailand, he played a key role in international smuggling operations, orchestrating the importation of drugs into Ireland, a critical component of the Boylan gang's business model. The Boylan brothers' ascent to power was not achieved alone. Their reign was bolstered by a cadre of trusted lieutenants and violent associates whose loyalty and brutality solidified the gang's grip on the drug trade. These men acted as enforcers, hitmen, and money launderers, creating a layered criminal enterprise that extended from the streets to the international drug markets of Southeast Asia. One of the most notorious among their inner circle was Paul Crosby. Serving a 10-year prison sentence for facilitating the murder of Keane Mulready Woods, Crosby embodied the gang's violent ethos. His criminal record included arson attacks tied to the gang feud and audacious acts of defiance that extended even behind bars. In one chilling episode, Crosby made mocking phone calls to rivals, taunting Owen Maguire's paralysis with cruel laughter and boasting about assaults on Maguire's allies. Crosby was not immune to the feud's violence himself. In January 2020, an armed assailant mistakenly shot an innocent taxi driver outside Crosby's home, a stark reminder of how the feud's violence spilled beyond its intended targets, traumatizing the wider community. Alongside Crosby were other key figures, including Richie Carberry. As a senior player in the gang and brother-in-law to Robbie Lawler, the serial killer whose own death in Belfast marked a turning point in the feud, Carberry's life was emblematic of the constant threat facing those linked to the Boylan faction. In November 2019, Carberry was shot 6 times outside his home, a brutal attack that further escalated tensions. Then there was Keith Brannigan, a close friend of Keith Boylan, who, though not deeply involved in criminal activities, became collateral damage in the feud. Brannigan was killed in broad daylight in August 2019, a stark demonstration that association with the Boylans was often enough to make someone a target. Robbie Lawler himself was a figure both feared and reviled. Known for his ruthless killings and involvement in the drug trade, Lawler was suspected of orchestrating some of the most horrific acts during the feud, including the murder of Mulready Woods. However, Lawler's reign ended violently when he was shot dead in Belfast in April 2020, a killing that was seen by many as retribution and a shift in the power dynamics of the feud. While Keith maintained a visible presence on the streets, Josh Boylan operated with a degree of anonymity, leveraging international connections to sustain the gang's drug supply. Based primarily in Thailand, Josh coordinated the importation of cannabis and other drugs destined for Ireland. Intelligence gathered by guards revealed complex smuggling networks linking Southeast Asia to Ireland. One notable example involved Jamie Marn, an Irish native who was sentenced in Norway after being caught importing nearly 30 kilograms of cannabis from Thailand. This shipment was intended for distribution by the Boylan Group back in Ireland, underscoring the sophistication and reach of their operations. Josh's overseas role was critical in maintaining the gang's dominance. By managing supply chains abroad, he helped insulate the gang from local law enforcement scrutiny and ensured a steady flow of drugs onto the streets. The Gangland feud exacted a devastating toll on the local area's social fabric. Families lived in fear, businesses shuttered, and the streets were scarred by violence and intimidation. The murder of Keane Mulready Woods was a particularly harrowing moment, galvanizing community outrage and triggering widespread protests. In January 2020, hundreds of residents took to the streets demanding an end to the violence and the removal of gang influence from their town. The message was clear. They would no longer tolerate the ongoing terror wrought by the feud. The impact extended beyond the immediate victims. The constant threat of shootings, kidnappings, and bombings forced many to alter their daily lives. Schools, public spaces, and even homes became potential targets or battlegrounds in the war between factions. Law enforcement efforts intensified in response. Guards conducted numerous raids, seizing drugs, cash, and weapons. One significant discovery was a large cache of pipe bombs in RD linked to the Boylan Group, an alarming indication of their willingness to escalate violence through explosives. Many gang members were arrested and jailed, weakening the Boylan Group's infrastructure. Others fled abroad, seeking refuge from the intensifying crackdown. Yet despite these setbacks, the gang's core leadership, particularly the Boylan brothers, remained elusive and defiant. The public unmasking of Keith and Josh Boylan during court proceedings dealing with money laundering cases marked a watershed moment. For years, their identities had been shrouded in secrecy, protected by a web of loyal associates and layers of criminal activity. But the exposure revealed the full extent of their control over the local drug trade and the violent legacy they had forged. Senior Garda officers warned that while naming the brothers publicly complicated their operations, especially Josh's international dealings, it was unlikely to bring an immediate end to their drug network. The gang's deep-rooted connections and adaptability meant they could continue to operate, albeit under increased scrutiny. The unmasking also sent a message to the wider criminal underworld. The Boylan brothers were no longer untouchable shadows, but known figures whose activities would be relentlessly pursued by law enforcement. That is it for today's video. What is your thoughts on our story? And leave a comment below, and I will see you next time.